everyone, and welcome back to The Whole Tooth, a podcast all about sharks, rays, and their underwater habitat, brought to you by the Save Our Seas Foundation. I'm your host, Isla, and every episode I sit down with experts in marine science, conservation, and storytelling to discuss lots of different topics and answer your questions about sharks and the oceans. Our aim here is to make concepts in shark science and conservation accessible to everyone. There is just so much to learn. Even as a scientist myself, I am learning new things every single episode. Like, I was today years old when I found out that there is a species of shark called the lost shark, and we find out why it's called that in this episode. So come along and learn cool facts about sharks with me. Today's episode is focused around a subject that a couple of you have requested, including Gayatri Bandara on Instagram and Gabriel from France, which is what are the rarest and most endangered species of shark in the world? Now, this is a tough question for many different reasons, one of them being that the elasmobranchs, the sharks and rays, are the second most threatened vertebrate group in the world, second only to the amphibians. Recent studies have shown that over a third of sharks and rays are threatened with extinction. So there are quite a few species that you can class as endangered and are classified as endangered by the IUCN Red List. And of course, that's just the species that we know enough about. We are still discovering new species all the time. And for many species, we actually just don't have the data to say how healthy their population is. And so species could be in decline without us even knowing. So it's pretty tough to say what the most endangered species are, but luckily there are people who have dedicated their lives to plugging these knowledge gaps, and my guest today is one of them. Dr Dave Ebert has devoted his life to studying sharks, in particular rare and lesser known species. He is the founder of the Lost Sharks Project. You may know him as Lost Shark Guy on Twitter and Instagram. And through this project, he has undertaken many expeditions all over the world in search of lost sharks. That species that we know existed at some point in time somewhere in the world, but no one has seen them for quite a while. So we need to find them to figure out if they actually still exist. These explorations have led to the discovery of not only lost sharks, but also over 50 new shark species. Dave has also contributed over 100 IUCN Red List assessments for sharks. That's the huge bodies of research that determine whether a species is classified as endangered by IUCN and just how close to extinction it is. And he has also authored over 30 books, including what I would argue is the Bible for shark enthusiasts, Sharks of the World, which is the most comprehensive source of information relating to all known shark species in the world, written by Dave, Mark Dando, and Sarah Fowler. Now, Dave has been on this podcast before with Andrew Lewin, the co-host of their podcast, Beyond Jaws, and we did a crossover episode. But we were both going to be at Sharks International a couple of weeks ago, and I thought it would be a brilliant opportunity to record this episode on endangered species with Dave in person. Sharks International is a conference that happens once every 4 years with the aim to bring together people in shark science and conservation from all across the world. This year it was hosted in Valencia in Spain at one of the most unique conference venues I've ever been to, Oceanographic, which is a huge aquarium on the outskirts of Valencia. I was there with Save Our Seas, and it was just so amazing to meet so many people who I've admired from afar, some of whom have been guests on this podcast before, but only virtually. So it was really cool to get to meet them in person and just to have all of these like-minded, incredible people in one room who are dedicating their lives to understanding and conserving sharks and rays. And there were so many great discussions that happened at the conference, including some of the big issues facing sharks globally and how we're going to tackle them, advances in science and technology, working with local fishing communities, and communication and public engagement. So all different pieces of the jigsaw. So there was a lot going on, but I was lucky enough to get 40 minutes with Dave to record this episode. Because we are at a busy conference in the middle of an aquarium, there is a little bit of background noise, but nothing too much. If anything, you get the atmosphere of Sharks International. I really did pick Dave's brains about the rarest and most endangered species that we currently know about, including the pondicherry shark and, yes, the lost shark. We also discuss how a species becomes endangered in the first place and what happens when you discover a species that's new to science and you have to name it. I really hope you like this one. It's filled with anecdotes about Dave's crazy travels and career, and of course, packed to the gills with weird shark facts. So without further ado, let's dive into our episode. Hello, Dave, and welcome back to the Whole Tooth Podcast.
Well, thanks, Isla. I'm happy to be back here and in Valencia, Spain for a change.
I know, in a much warmer environment than I'm used to. I don't know about yourself.
Yeah, I just came from California, so it's been pretty warm there as well. But actually, it's kind of fun today to do it in person.
This is the first time we're actually meeting in person.
I know.
After, a year?
Yeah.
Over a year,
yeah.
Just communicating on WhatsApp
and other social media forums and Zoom and whatever. So it's kind of nice to actually be in the same room, be together, and actually get to meet each other.
That's it, yeah. And as I will have already said in the introduction, we're at Sharks International, which is kind of like the big mecca for shark scientists.
Yep. It's a shark nerd camp.
Shark nerd camp. But it's so nice to, after, obviously years of, we've had the pandemic where a lot of people haven't been able to meet each other. It's just so lovely to see everyone in person.
Yeah, absolutely. And the nice thing with the Sharks International is it brings a lot of people that you don't normally see. Like I'll go to an American elasmobranch meeting, but a lot of people I'll see here, which is only once every 4 years, I never see in person because they don't come to my meetings, or I don't come to the European elasmobranch meetings or the Oceanic Chondrichthyine Society. But at this meeting, you kind of get a lot of these people get to all congregate here, because it is like sort of the ultimate shark nerd camp to come here.
It is, yeah. And all the talks as well. Like I know you've been networking today, but all of the talks, even if you're not in that field, it's just so fascinating. There's so many different facets to shark conservation and shark science.
Yes.
That it's just completely fascinating to be in these sessions and listen to all the incredible people that are working on sharks from all over the world.
Right, and I think a really neat thing, I was telling Paul Cox, who's the CEO of the Shark Trust, that I like some of the stuff they're trying. I realize not everything's going to work the way they want, but like they're recording the session so I can, and it'll be available for those of us that are registered for a year. So if they have parallel sessions like they do, you can't be in two places at once, but I can go home, I've got a year, I can have a cup of coffee, a drink, and watch the sessions as I want to catch them. And I think that's terrific to have that flexibility. And one of the things when Paul was on the Beyond Jaws podcast with myself and Andrew Lewin, we talked about how I think these conferences need to change. And I think this is like a good model. I'm not saying it's the perfect one because it's something a little different, but I think the way these conferences have been going on for decades, they need to change or they're just going to die a slow death.
Yeah, absolutely. Because I think we were talking about something similar when you were last on the Whole Tooth with Andrew.
Yeah.
And we were talking about, the importance of making shark science more accessible to non-scientists, but also making these kinds of things more accessible to scientists from other parts of the world, different backgrounds who, these conferences are expensive.
Yes. Yeah.
And it's a shame, and because you've got, on top of the conference fees, you've also got the travel.
Yep.
As well.
Yeah. And I think even this one was nice because last week it was an all virtual for 5 days. Yeah. And so people were able to connect. Although for me, some of the talks were between 12 midnight and 3 a.m., but I'll catch the video later on. But then they followed up this week by having 3 days of in-person talks, so you could actually congregate here. And they had a couple event activities going on just before the conference. Yeah. So it was nice to be able to come here, connect, network with people, hear some talks. And then, as I say, if you can't catch every talk because you're talking to some people in person, you will have a year to watch them. And I think it's the way you need to go on these things, because these conferences are expensive to get there. And if you're self-funded, people like myself and many of us, you can't afford to do more than one a year, maybe. Yeah. And so, I hope other groups, organizations listening to this will kind of take note and look at trying to evolve their annual conferences somehow, how to fit their needs. It'll be more inclusive.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think it was such an important aspect to come out of the pandemic. One of the positive aspects to come out of the pandemic, one of few, but the fact that in the scientific world and the academic world, we started to have more conversations about how can we make these things happen for people who aren't able to attend the conferences. How do we make them more open? And so I just think it's really lovely to see that being continued after things have gone back to quote unquote normal.
Yeah. We actually talked about this in the American Asthma Society. A group of us were already discussing these virtual things back just before the pandemic, before we had any idea there was going to be a pandemic. And then when this happened, it kind of forced us into looking at some different options. And I think now it's kind of forced everyone into this thinking, this new way of thinking of stuff. I think we should run with it, not just go back to the old ways of doing stuff, because it's going to be hard. You're going to continue to exclude people because a lot of people just can't afford to do a lot of these conferences unless you have some kind of a funding base to do it.
Yeah, and a lot of conferences do bursaries, but there's limited amounts, and sometimes they're still not even...
And they're also mainly for students. So if you're a professional like myself, that would have to self-fund. Some people have funding projects, they get funded to go to conferences, that's terrific. But that's a small percentage, and I think as costs go up, you're going to continue to lose people. But like the nice thing about this is last week we had a chance to interact with people all over the world. I don't know, I'm sure they got a breakdown like how many countries people represented that were in the virtual session versus this week. It'd be interesting to know, because I know when we did, as an example, we did this global wedgefish and guitarfish symposium, which, as those know, that those are probably the most endangered vertebrate group in the world, are wedgefish and guitarfish, flat sharks.
And we're going to talk about them.
Yeah. And so but the whole thing is, we were going to originally have it in person, but because of the pandemic, we said, let's do it virtually. And we ended up getting people from almost 40 countries. We had 300 people registered for this thing from all over the world. We did it over 2 weekends, and it was just, from what we could tell, just a wild success. And we posted this stuff, and as an acknowledgement, Save Our Seas funded that, and because of that, we've posted the videos from the presentations, and they're going to be up in perpetuity. So, and anyone can go in there. You don't even, in our case, because we were able to get support for that, you don't have to, even if you didn't register, you can go on there and watch these talks anytime.
Yeah, but where is that people can go?
They go into the American Elasmobranch Society webpage and go, and you'll see Global Wedgefish Guitarfish Symposium, and you click the link, it'll take you to the YouTube channel. You may be able to Google it up and find it, but if you go to the American Elasmobranch Society page, you can find it. And again, you don't have to be a member, you don't have to register, you just got to go on there, find the link, click, and it'll take you there.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
This episode is all about endangered species of shark, and I think we get asked this question probably once every 2 months when we put out a call for questions on the podcast, and that is, what is the most endangered species of shark? And I can't think of a better person to chat to about lost sharks, rare sharks, endangered sharks. But how did you get into studying and looking for rare species in the first place?
I'll try to give you the summary story of it, but I was really fortunate in that when I was starting my career, and I kind of have now coined this term, the Jaws generation, because before the movie Jaws came out, there was no real field of shark science. It was Shark Attack, and that was it. And after that, after the movie came out, and I was in high school when the movie came out, but in the late 70s, really in the 80s, people got interested. You hear a lot of negative stuff, but people got really interested in, well, how old do sharks get? How many species of sharks are out there? And because the same old textbooks had the same number of sharks, and when you get into the flat sharks arrays, there was almost nothing. Well, because of that, there was funding became available through the universities, and I was just starting out in grad school in the 80s. And so at that time, because there was no real path, it was just, if you could think about it and you're creative, you could pursue it. The professor would say, well, go check it out, find out. And so this whole generation of us just were being creative and go find stuff out. Like, and at that time, white sharks weren't even really known much about them. Of course, now they've become the focus of everybody's stuff. But at the time, I got interested in these weird sharks. I would go out and I started out looking for stuff. In fact, what got me going was a fellow named John McCosker, who was the director of the Steinhardt Aquarium. And he says, we got these sharks out here called seven-gill sharks, broad-nosed seven-gill sharks. And he said, we catch them all the time. We know nothing about them. And I was like, well, that's cool. And so that's how I started. Was my first entry into doing research for my master's, looking at these seven-gill sharks. And I worked on six-gill sharks, which we also caught as well. Mm-hmm. And then I just had a lot of us had a curious mind, wanted to know about these sharks. And so that's how I kind of started, just looking at these weird sharks that nobody knew about, and then I just built on from there. And then just as I traveled around, would go to different places, I'd see these I started finding these. At the time I didn't call them lost sharks, but I would go to these different, like South Africa and other Namibia, and I'd find these sharks and I'd collect them. And my advisor, Leonard Campagna, was one of the top shark guys in the world at the time. I'd bring back specimens. He goes, this specimen hasn't been seen in like 120 years. This one we know from like 3 specimens that were caught 75 years ago. No one's seen it since. And I was just out in these like remote areas in Africa and Asia finding these things. And so I kind of just thought, well, this is kind of cool. These weren't necessarily new species. These were just species that were lost, nobody had seen. Yeah. And I didn't call them lost sharks then, but they were just...
But there is actually a species called a lost shark.
Yes, there is. And that was a species that was just named, and this is actually a great example of it. There was a species that was named in 2019, and it was Will White, Peter Kine, and Mark Harris, 3 colleagues of mine. And it's known from 3 specimens. The last one was caught in it wasn't even caught, it was in 1934, and these were all in museums in Southeast Asia. And they couldn't figure out what this thing was, and they looked at it and they realized that this was a species of shark that appears to have gone extinct in the 1934 was the last record. And so when they named this thing, the scientific name is Carcharodontis obscularis, they gave it the common name lost shark. Yeah. And it was literally the first time they declared a species, a shark, extinct upon being named. And here's something that's nobody had seen for, at that time, 85 years. Mm-hmm. And that's just like the exact reason I do what I do, is because of something like that, because these lost sharks are just slipping away. Yeah. And nobody knows anything about them. And we could spend a whole couple hours just talking about all these other ones, but there's a number of these things that are just disappearing. No one, unless myself or someone like me goes and looks for them, we have no idea what's going on.
Which is very sad, because it's like these species are disappearing into the sands of time without anyone even knowing about them. And just to go back to the lost shark, so I was writing an article recently about the most endangered species of shark, and so we did like a list of 10, and I put the lost shark on it because on IUCN it is still labelled as critically endangered, but in brackets it says possibly extinct. Yeah. And is that just because so few have been found that you're not sure whether you'll find another one?
It's hard. I mean, you like to think, here's a good example. There's rays, just so people know, are flat sharks. If you take a shark and you flatten it, it's a ray. And I have to push that because rays are even in more trouble than a lot of the sharks, and nobody thinks about the rays. Well, there was what's called a tentacle butterfly ray from the northern Indian Ocean that we were on the verge of listing as critically endangered, possibly extinct. And a colleague in Iran found these things in the Straits of Hormuz, which is like one of the most difficult areas, let's say, to go into. And he found these things, and he contacted Arima Jabata originally, and then got in touch with myself. And I'm like, oh my God, we found this ray we were almost ready to declare extinct in the IUCN. And there's a small area of the world where these things are still there, and they catch them in fisheries. And we have a publication now coming out on this thing. But this is the kind of thing where this thing, we're not sure, we think it sort of ranged from sort of Pakistan, India, in some of that area. And now all we know is from one little tiny stretch of coastline off Iran, and nowhere else in the world is this thing. It's like a remnant population, but we thought that it was extinct. And so that's a good example of it. And people say, like, well, why are these important? Well, the reason important is because a white shark is a very top predator. And by the time you start seeing issues like in the white shark population, which are generally doing pretty well, the problem is all these species below that, these lost sharks and these rays, the problem is they're food for a lot of these things. And those are going to go first. By the time you see white sharks are having problems like they talk about in South Africa now, forget the white sharks. It's all these other species that have probably been impacted that nobody pays any attention to, because a lot of them are fished intensely in artisanal fisheries. And again, there's nobody except for myself and a few others. There's nobody bothering to go out and see what they're doing. And so, and that's why you need to pay attention to these lost sharks.
And because like a lot of them, because I remember when I was researching it, and one of the things that I did is went on the IUCN red list and just literally selected all the critically endangered species and looked through them all. And it's amazing the amount of them that are like, I mean, there is, the two hammerhead species that are critically endangered, who are, big sharks, but then the majority of them are, as you say, the ray species, or, they're very small. Like
they're small. They're small. Most of them are less than 6 feet. Most of them are like, less than, a meter, say around a meter, maybe 80 centimeters to maybe 120 centimeters, a lot of them. And they're caught in fisheries. And a lot of the thing is, I talk about this a lot too on our podcast, is that people in developed countries, in the Western countries, the average person doesn't really understand, like for a lot of the people in like West Africa, East Africa, and a lot of the world, if they don't catch anything, they're not going to eat. So you've got to walk that line between making sure people can eat and sending in, this is a whole other discussion, but sending in food's just not going to do it, because people want to work, they need to get out. You've got traditions, cultures and stuff, but you want them to be able to do it sustainably. And a lot of times when they are fishing the sharks and the rays, that means because a lot of the bony fishes have been wiped out, and so they're down there. So it's a food security issue, and and a lot of people realize that if you haven't been to these types of places, you really don't understand. You run to the grocery store, you call Instacart or whoever, but you're talking about, you don't get out of bed, you go out and you fish and you catch something, or you don't eat that day. When you see something like, you talk about something that's critically endangered, sawfish, which have an added value that were almost, I don't say a nuisance, but they're a big fish, they have a lot of flesh. They catch one, but nobody really targeted them. Well, because the fins are so valuable, that suddenly a lot of these villages can make a lot of money all of a sudden from certain buyers on the fins. And so they let's go we'll target them more. And as we know, sawfishes have disappeared from most of their range outside the U.S., Australia, and a few other places. They've vanished. years ago, 30 years ago, when I was first going to Africa, they would once in a while you'd hear of them. They would still get them, but now it's a huge event in or even West Africa if somebody gets a sawfish, because you just rarely ever see them again.
Yeah, we've actually got two of the rostrums at home, because my granddad used to. He was in World War II. He was stationed in Africa at certain points, and he came back with all of this stuff that now, as a kid, I didn't think anything about it, but now I'm like, oh my goodness, you probably wouldn't get that ever again, and they're enormous. They're huge. And and
you find places, there's different institutions that have I'll say piles, but large numbers of these. And the thing with the sawfish is, because people would cut off the rostrum for curios and they would save them, you have some idea how many used to be around. But if I say how many pondicherry sharks are out there?
Yes.
You'd have no idea.
Yeah.
All you know, and just for people to know, that pondicherry shark's been one of these sort of I always call it sort of the panda bear, the lost shark world, because it's sort of the logo. But this is a shark that we know used to occur up in the northern Indian Ocean, It was discovered in 1839. Nobody's seen one in at least 50 years.
Yeah.
And we don't know if this is one that may be extinct. We're not sure. But where it occurs is really intensely fished areas. But you have all we have is some museum specimens similar to the lost shark. But we have a few more of these pondicherry sharks. And I can tell you, I get photographs all the time. People saying, "Is this the pondicherry? Is this the pondicherry?" And no, it's not the pondicherry shark.
Because they look quite similar to some other species as well.
Yeah.
That's one of the problems with the pondicherry.
Right. They're in a group. It's called requiem sharks, and they're these small little. I say small, like 4 feet, 120 centimeter length sharks, and even some are a little smaller. But there's a whole group of them. And so sometimes people will get one and think, oh, we've got a pondicherry, now it's a spot tail, or it's a graceful shark, or it's something else. And so why like say some of those species are still there and the pondicherry's gone, I have no idea. And because they've just been gone so long, we don't really have a good idea how many of them used to be around, how common they were. Another species, if I can use an example, there's a species called the honeycomb cat shark, which is sort of endemic to the KwaZulu-Natal, southern Mozambique coastline, and we know from records in the 50s and 60s they used to be caught frequently in the shrimp trawls, offshore shrimp trawls. And this species, the last record we have of one was in 1972, and this species was not named until 2006, 34 years after it disappeared. So when people ask me like what I do, I go, well, I try to, if they don't have a name, I try to give them a name, because if they don't have a name, it's harder to implement any conservation or management policies. So, but here's a little shark. Again, it doesn't get very big, 50, 60 centimeters, and it's been gone, 50 years, and we know it was caught. We only know this because of photographs and some people were studying it. We're just while they were studying, they were recording it, but we didn't. But it had been misidentified, and people didn't realize it was actually an undescribed species. And so this is another example of what impacts this having on the environment?
Yeah, because for anyone that's listening who's maybe into birds, the equivalent would be the LBJs, the little brown jobs. So these are the kind of sharks that are like the LBJs of the shark world.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. I heard it. They use it. LBJs. They use a different term for them, but
they do in Scotland as well. But I'm going to be PG.
Yeah, we want this to say a family show.
So obviously someone might contact you and be like, we found this weird shark, we don't know what it is, we've never seen it before, or we think it's this very rare species. How do you even begin the process of looking for this?
Well, because I've been doing this for a while, I have a pretty good network around, and the first thing I usually encounter when people send me something that they think it's either something they know, or they ask me if I could verify the ID, it's the photograph. And for those listening, if you're in some area, you see something, an unusual shark or a ray, lay it out sideways so it's a lateral view, and put a little measure, something kind of a reference. If you don't have a ruler, something like a pen or a pencil, or just something that is a reference point, how big it is, and just take a lateral picture. Because a lot of times they'll just take a picture of it, and it'll be like kind of dirt and sand on it, or it'll be in a pile of sharks, it'll be a head and a tail sticking out, or they'll do it more artistically, which it might look fine to them, but it's hard for me, because a lot of these sharks, there's subtle differences, and the only way I can really do is looking at on a lateral thing. If you get a picture of the teeth, if it's assuming it's dead, a picture of the teeth. If it's a ray, just lay it down flat and just take a picture looking down on it, and then maybe if it's not too big of a ray or a shark, you can take picture of the underside of this snout. That can help. Just those couple things there are huge. And you'd think it would be simple on pictures, but most people don't know how to take pictures of like a shark or a ray that would help me to identify it to species. And so otherwise I might say, well, it could be this, or this, which is helpful.
Well, because some of these species, because I obviously have a copy of Sharks of the World, which, because I'm a shark nerd, is just basically bedtime reading. Like, one of my favorite things to do is to go to the back, look at the funkiest names of a shark, and then go and read about it, because there's so sharks. I use the term shark to describe sharks and rays and skates and chimeras, but this book is just covers sharks, and there's so many even in this book.
Yeah.
But the differences between some of the species, you're literally talking like the shape of a tooth, or the shape of their mouth from the underside, or a very specific part of it.
Yeah, we tried in some of the Sharks of the World book, in some of those groups, we tried to break them down to like the requiem sharks, which we've talked a little about. The thing has things like bull sharks in it, oceanic white tips, and sandbar sharks, which are some sharks people might be familiar with. But we try to put, like in the beginning of the book, like a characteristic you can separate those sharks out from is if it has a ridge between the dorsal fins, which most people, it's like, oh, ridge between the dorsal fin. It either does or it doesn't. The reason that's something like that, we try to put a character in there, is that it separates out. So so in that group you have, say, 34 species of sharks. You can separate out, you can eliminate half of them, because roughly half, I don't know the exact number off the top, I should, but you can get those that say if there's a ridge present, okay, well, you know about half these don't have a ridge. And so if you say like David has a ridge or doesn't have a ridge, okay, that eliminates a whole bunch of options. And now you work with what you have, what's left. Are there any unique colors to the fins? Are they plain? And sometimes when sharks are dead or they've been sitting in the sun for a while, they lose their color. So color is not always the best option, but sometimes some of the species you can tell if it's a more fresh species from the fin colors will help. It's a process of elimination. If you're looking at a black tip shark, does it have a black fin tip? And again, that'll eliminate some more species. It's all a process of elimination, and then it could come down to, depending on what part of the world you're in, you can narrow it down to maybe a few options. And then that's where, if you can get like a lateral picture of the teeth are very distinctive in that particular group of sharks. So it's all a process of elimination. But if you look at the beginning of some of those groups, at the beginning of that section, we'll usually have some characters that'll say like, here's how to break them into different groups. And even something like that is very helpful.
And then say once you've got to that point where you've been able to identify a species, and you're 100% confident that's the species. Or even it's a species that you've kind of maybe known has existed, but like you said, doesn't have a name yet. How do you even go about officially naming a new species?
That's a whole process. The thing I want to back on the thing I tell people, like, 'cause they say, well, you go look, how do you go find all these sharks? And it's like, I never go look for a new species. I go there, I always go to look to identify. I work with people in country who want that information, but we go through and we survey there and we identify what we can find. And it's usually during that process we'll find species that are rare, unique, we haven't seen, and of course new species is how we do that. But if I find something that looks like, well, this might be a new species, once in a while I'll have that sort of what I call that eureka moment where, like, yes, that's a new species. Most of the time it's like, I'd probably say 75% of the time, I'm like, I think that might be new, but we need to, when these are already usually at the fish markets, they're already dead. It will say, let's save this one, or buy it off the fisherman. We usually buy him off him so he doesn't come away with nothing, because they're going to market, they're selling it anyway. So whether they get money from me or somebody else, will just buy it, and then I'll take it back to wherever my colleague's sort of base of operation is, and then a lot of times I'll take up some measurements in the field on it, and then we'll work, and then I try to like source a museum that's either in country or in the region. In worst case, say I'll bring some back and put them into museums like California Academy of Sciences is close to me, so it makes it easy for me. But we'll try to, like, if we can collect multiple ones, we'll spread them around to different places. But then begins the fun, the sort of the CIS type of thing where we're trying to go through, and it's kind of a fun, because it really is like a crime scene investigation, trying to figure out like what this thing is, and so you go and you got to do. And one thing about the museums, you have to go to museums, you have to look at comparative material because you need to make sure it's different. You have to write up a description on it, which isn't as bad as it sounds. The hard part is the fun hard part is why is it different?
Okay.
And now people today use genetics, but that's just one tool in the toolbox, because in a lot of these places you can't just say, oh, we're going to just take a fin clip, or we're just going to do some thing, because most of these countries don't have that ability. So you need to show why if you're looking at this thing, it's different. And an interesting thing is a lot of times the fishermen know. So I spend a lot of time talking to the fishermen. Often it's through interpreters because they don't speak a language. It might be Swahili or Xhosa or some other language I don't speak, or Taiwanese or some, and so, which is kind of fun. But that's why I work with also people in countries. They know the language and stuff. And the fishermen, they'll say, they'll give you like 3 reasons why it's different. So in my mind, I'm like, okay, well, I'm going to look at those because they think it's different. And these are when they have similar looking species. And the reason they know this is because sometimes they'll get more money for one species versus another, even though they kind of look the same. Example I use is if people are familiar with angel sharks. In Taiwan, they catch 4 species of angel sharks. And the fishermen at the markets, I was seeing this when I first went to Taiwan as a young person many years ago. They were putting them in piles to the same species. And I thought, that's kind of interesting. I sort of asked, we get more money for this one, we get less money for this one, and so there was so it was worth their time to separate them, and they knew they were different. But even my Taiwanese colleagues that were in academia, they knew why they did it, but they really couldn't tell them apart. But the fishermen knew. If they want to talk, they'll give me some clues as to why it's different, and then I got that knowledge I'll take with me to separate. So you want to compare it, why it's different, and then you have to basically write up a paper. It has to be what they call peer-reviewed in a scientific publication. And you have to have a specimen, because sometimes people go like, well, why'd you kill this? Well, it was already dead in a fish market. But you have to have a specimen in a museum, so if other researchers come along later, they have like what's called a type specimen or a holotype. And then so it really becomes like a historical document is what it is. It's a historical artifact. And so you want to be able to like identify, that's what you base everything else on. And then so once you have your specimens in the museum, your paper gets published, then you officially have a name.
You did mention angel sharks there.
Yeah.
And so the question that we get asked, which I think is quite a hard question to answer, is what is the most endangered species of shark, or what is the most threatened type of shark? And I don't know how you would answer. How would you answer that?
Well, there's a number of species. I was just involved with a paper with Nick Dolby and many others with the IUCN that found roughly about a third of all sharks are vulnerable or higher, fall in the IUCN criteria. You range from data deficient to least concerned to near threatened, and then you get to vulnerable, endangered, and then critically endangered. And about a third of them they figure are vulnerable or higher.
Yeah, so those, just briefly, people can read this in the article that I wrote.
Yeah.
But like you've got data deficient, which is like we
don't know anything about them.
Yeah, and then near threatened is like it could within the near future.
Should pay attention to it. But it's keep an eye on it. Yeah.
But then when you get into vulnerable, endangered, and then critically endangered, those are the 3 threatened categories. Right. When people say something's threatened with extinction, those are the categories that they're talking about. Right.
Yes. Yeah. And as a group, and again, I could, if I had a Nick Dolby or a couple people here, we could have a nice.
I mean, he is around.
I know. I know. I'll probably be having a beer with him later on tonight. But we could throw around different groups. But so it's hard to say like one species. But if I had to pick a group that I mentioned earlier, it's these wedgefish, guitarfish. And in that particular group is a group of vertebrates that's probably the most endangered group of any vertebrate group, because all the species of the wedgefish, and we're called giant guitarfish, it's about 16, 18 species, they're all like basically critically endangered as a group, where some of the other ones you have some that might be vulnerable or endangered. Pretty much all of those are critically endangered. And so as a group, those are in a lot of trouble.
There's some in the aquarium. Have you? We're at an aquarium at Sharks International.
Right.
But there is some in the aquarium, and it's the first time I've seen them. I mean, I don't know when else I would have seen them, because they're quite hard to find nowadays.
Right. And a lot of these species occur in areas where in countries like in use East or West Africa, where there's not like a lot, there hasn't been traditionally like a lot of infrastructure or people that were even, because sharks were so far down the line and rays are even further down the line, that people just don't have any pay any close attention to those things. So now that we're bringing more awareness to them, that's why I always try to talk about flat sharks, which are rays, but if you mention flat sharks, people pay more attention to them. But as a group, those are probably amongst the most critically endangered. You have sawfish are in the same group. Are also in that same order of sharks, rays, and what we call the shark rays. They call them rhino rays. I like to call them shark rays, but they're another group that are mostly critically endangered. And with them, these are also coastal species. Coastal species, where they are intensely fished, like sawfish. It's not just the fishing, but a lot of their habitat, mangroves, have been wiped out for aquaculture or for other luxury resorts or whatever. They've just have been impacted, and so they don't have anywhere to reproduce, to carry out their life cycle. And so that's another aspect people don't think about.
Exactly, right? Because a lot of the species that are actually on the critically endangered list as well are species that are very specific to a certain habitat, or they exclusively exist on reefs or shallow areas where they are extremely vulnerable to overfishing, which is something at least, especially when we talk about overfishing, right? You think about the open ocean, you think about and this is a huge problem, is big sharks being taken as bycatch, but also targeted directly. But then when you're talking about coastal species or shallow waters, they're particularly vulnerable, especially when you're talking about small scale or artisanal fisheries as well.
Exactly. Some of the larger sharks tend to be more wide ranging. They're going everywhere. But some of these small sharks, and I talked about the honeycomb earlier, and I can give some other examples, but they have a very narrow stretch of coastline, sometimes a few hundred kilometers, and that's the only place these things occur. And so if you impact them in that area, they're not wide ranging, and so you can really put a big impact on their population, especially if they're coastal. And some of these species we talk about, like the lost shark or the pondicherry shark, or I talked to the tentacled butterfly ray, they only have a very narrow coastal range that we know them from. They may have been a little wider at one time, but now we don't know, and that whole area is contracting now because of fishing. As I mentioned with the tentacled butterfly ray, there's only one little area in the whole world, and it's the Hormuz Straits, where this thing still occurs.
Mind-boggling. We've excused the little break there. We've actually had lunch since we were last.
And it was an excellent lunch too.
It was a good lunch. We had to move out of the room that we're in, so if it sounds different to you guys, that'll be why. We're in a slightly different room. But I just wanted to make sure that we got this into the podcast because you have just discovered a new skate genus.
Right.
So can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, this is what's interesting is that this is actually my first genus. I've done lots of species, but it's actually my first time in a genus. Is when you have a group of species that are very similar, it's the next level of classification that the genus and the scientific name will be the same. You'll have like something genus, and the species name will be distinct. Well, there's this whole group of skates, and I say a group, there's 4 species in this particular genus, and they had been in a different genus. And why it's important is, again, it gets down to life history, being able to protect things and develop conservation and management policy on the species. And if you have the wrong species, you can be making the wrong policy. When you have the same genus, you're only expanding that because now you have an entire group of, in this case, flat sharks, skates, that are in the wrong group. And what's interesting is this was off California, so it wasn't even in some remote part of the world. The group of skates there, turns out they are in a completely new genus that I just recently named. The genus is Caliraj, which is named after the state of California in Baja California in the Gulf of California. So it's because that's where these skates mainly occur. They get up this genus, they range up to southeast Alaska and then down to the Gulf of California. But since I'm from California and all of them occur on California waters, I decided we're going to call it Caliraja. But it's kind of neat that here you have like high tech, Silicon Valley, and we're still finding new species of sharks.
Yeah.
Or not just new species, but new genus of sharks, which is it's an entirely new group. So there's actually 4 species in this genus, and it's pretty cool.
It's very cool.
Yeah. And I didn't even have to go anywhere exotic to find it. I just had to look in my own backyard.
I mean, people would be amazed at how many times that probably happens, right? Because we're still finding out so much about sharks, rays, skates.
Yeah, well, about 10 years ago, I named a new species of ghost shark. Well, actually, one of my students and I named a new species of ghost shark from California. And so that was pretty cool that we're still finding new sharks off California, entirely new species. I know I'm aware of a couple other ghost sharks off California. I just haven't been able to get one yet to like name it officially, but there's probably at least one more species out there, maybe 2 that are new. So, and as I say, it's kind of neat. We're still finding new species here. I'm sure there's more. I mean, just over the last 20 years, I think there's about 5 shark species that were not known from California waters that I've now documented here. And though they were known to occur more off Mexico and further south, and here I found them off California now. So even that, again, is important information from a management standpoint.
I was going to say, will that have any implications for their protection or for their management?
Yeah, well, in California, we've actually done a pretty good job, and our shark populations are generally really good. And I like to highlight that because you hear too much doom and gloom, and I think people oftentimes, they dwell on that. And if you have a positive story, you should share that. And I think we've done a really good job on our shark populations. That includes the skates and the ghost sharks and the rays, and we should acknowledge that. And so I think that's a good thing. And so in that, basically with these new species we've documented from California, we have a better understanding of what occurs here and what even if it's something that might occur rarely here, we still have a better idea what occurs here. And going forward in the future, we know what's here. It can help improve policy as needed. But again, we've done a pretty good job in California. I got to tip my hat and I want to highlight that comment. So but it's always, you can know better. We know more now than we did 20 years ago.
Yeah, really positive. And I mean, IUCN as well, they've started doing kind of like the opposite of the red list. So they've got information now on their website where you can now see where our population is increasing rather than just decreasing, which is adds a little bit of light to what is quite a bleak situation.
Yeah, and sharks are a good one. You hear people always talk about the negative parts, and there are some certainly shark populations have gone down. And we've talked today about some that have disappeared possibly, but there are a lot of positive stories you can. And there are some shark species that you can fish sustainably, and there are areas where the governments have been very proactive in developing good policies and stuff. If you keep dwelling on the doom and gloom, people will just give up and say, well, they're all screwed, and so let's forget about it. So you got to highlight the positive.
Things can work.
Things do work, yeah, and you need to point it out. And one other thing too is not one size doesn't fit all. Like something that might work off California and Canada and Alaska may not work in Mexico or some other or Central or South America, just as examples. So you have to develop your policies and your conservation strategies to go with that particular area. Because this is where you're dealing with different species. And so you have these species occur, what occurs in California may not occur off Brazil, for example. In fact, it probably doesn't. So you need to have a different strategy in mind to how you might develop a positive conservation strategy that'll enable the populations to flourish.
That's why we need taxonomy. That's why we need to know about the life history traits.
Absolutely.
Do they need a very specific habitat type?
Yes.
A lot of that sounds like very basic information for a species, but for sharks, rays, skates, a lot of them we don't actually have that.
We don't even basic stuff like habitat. A lot of them we don't even know what their preferred habitat. And a lot of times during the life cycle, where the young are born is one habitat, where they grow up is a different habitat, and where the adults live is a different habitat. We know almost nothing about that with sharks, and there's unfortunately not a lot of people spend time on it because it's time consuming. You got to be in the field a lot, and too often people want to take the shortcut, like take lots of pretty pictures of the sharks in the wild, and that's kind of neat to do, but is that really helping you? advance anything because we still don't know where these things live.
Yeah.
Again, some species we do. It's not a blanket comment for all, but the majority of species, we don't really know anything about their life histories or more importantly, their habitat.
Because you've been on, expeditions all over the world to try and find lost species, or you've seen a lot of them as museum specimens or here in captivity. But if there was any species that you could see for yourself in the wild, do you know?
Oh yeah, big-eyed sand tiger, no doubt. Because this is probably one of the rarest sharks in the world. They do catch them occasionally, and this is a shark that probably gets at least 13, 14 feet long. It's in the same group as the white sharks, what they call the mackerel sharks, and it's just, to me, it's such a cool shark. And the best way to describe it, go Google this up. Big-eyed sand tiger, Odontaspis norenhai. I don't think there's been 20 ever seen in the world. And they've been found all over the world, one here, one there. And if I had one that I'd love to see in the wild, that would be the species.
Does it have big eyes?
Yes, it does.
Yes.
Yeah, it does. It's got big teeth too. And it's probably a pelagic species, we think, because they catch them when they do get them, they get them occasionally on tuna long lines. Mm-hmm. And but check that out. It actually looks like a proper shark, a big shark with teeth. But it's people talk about rare shark. This is probably one of the rarest sharks out there. We do get them they do catch them occasionally, but they're just, one will turn up here, one will turn up there, and they seem to be kind of global. But if I had one I'd love to see, that'd be it. I could literally drop the mic, walk off stage, and be a happy guy the rest of my life.
That'd be you done, retired.
Yeah, I hate to say retired, but yeah, if I could see one of those in the wild, would be just phenomenal. I would be I could die a happy guy at that point in time. That'd be one I'd be. And I've been fortunate to see a lot of cool ones, but that's one I would love to see.
Fantastic. Well, it has been such an absolute pleasure to have you back on the podcast. Thank you so much for coming back on, and also for putting up with having to move venues. But you did get lunch and coffee, so
did okay out of this whole thing. It's great seeing you at Isla, actually in person here in Valencia.
Yeah,
it's a great place, and hopefully we can do this again in person sometime.
This podcast was brought to you by the Save Our Seas Foundation. It was hosted and edited by me, Isla Hodgson. Our beautiful artwork is by Nicola Poulos, and the wonderful jingle you can hear right now is by David Knight. A huge thank you to Dave for taking time out of your Sharks International experience to talk to me all about endangered species. You can follow Dave's work by following @LostSharkGuy on social media, and you can listen to his and Andrew's podcast Beyond Jaws on all of your podcast apps. And a massive thank you to you at home for listening. As always, you can get in touch by emailing isla@saveourseas.com or via our social media. We are @SaveOurSeas Foundation on Instagram and @SaveOurSeas on Twitter. Alrighty, have a jawsome week, and we will see you next time.